I'm Beck and welcome to a spoiler recap for Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Chapeko before you dive into the sequel, Court of Wanderers. This story follows 23-year-old Remington Prendergast, or Remy, and he is from a louvre located in the city of Illyria. Remy is a reaper, so a vampire hunter, and he is tracking down Lady Daenerys. She used to be a court noble who treated him quite kindly, even though they didn't really know each other, and she has been turned into a vampire, so he has taken on her bounty. He finds her, fights her, kills her and 6 other vampires, and then is also at the same time confronted by Naji, another vampire. Naji is in a rage and is also spoiling for a fight, so he just jumps on board and fights Remy anyway when he is stopped by a vampire court noble who lets Remy go. Remy returns to Illyria with the vampires' bodies and he drops them off with Dr. Yost, who is using them for experimentation purposes on behalf of Remy's father. Speaking of Remy's father, to conclude the bounty on Lady Daenerys, he reports on Lady Daenerys' slaying and her death to his father Edgar Pendergast, Duke of Alanbon, and also his assistant Grimesworthy. Remy notes also that her blood looked bluish, but also did not smell of anything. Remy also raises concerns of missing children to his father, but his father just dismisses him. Instead, Edgar directs Remy to Duchess Giselle Delacroix to renew their friendship because he wants more information. Essentially, Edgar wants more political information about why these vampire court nobles have come to Illyria in pursuit of a peace treaty, and he gets this information by essentially pimping Remy out to Giselle so that she can steal reports off her husband Astonbury's desk and then let Remy read. Remy's father reinforces also that the Night Empress is their goal, who is the leader of the first court of vampires and has gone into hiding, and who also killed Remy's mother. Remy did swear on his mother's grave that he would avenge her no matter the cost. Edgar keeps Remy on a very tight leash, as we can see from him constantly guilting him, and also says that Remy's mother was bitten before giving birth to Remy, which has massively impacted their reputation at court. Because of this perceived status as vampire or Cambion, even though he's not either of those things, the court have refused him proper admission into the Reapers and they ostracize him as well. Therefore, Remy is used as a tool by his father Edgar, who has also a long-standing rival with the Duke of Astonbury, who is the head of the Reapers after usurping the position from Edgar himself, and their rivalry is very well known at court. It is also an open secret that at court Astonbury is very much estranged from his wife Giselle, and everyone knows that Remy and Giselle are sleeping together, and he's been forced into doing this since he was 16, so he's been used and preyed upon for years. The same night that Remy delivers his bounty for Lady Daenerys, there is a ball at Illyria to celebrate and begin the discussions of the peace treaty with Illyria and the vampire court nobles. At the ball, Rionis is introduced, who is a reaper that is the only trustworthy one and the one that Remy considers a friend. But shortly after talking to Rionis, Remy ends up leaving the ball after an outburst because he realizes that Lady Daenerys was not actually showing the signs of the frenzy that humans can show after being turned into a vampire, and because she didn't show these signs, she could potentially have been saved, but he was given false and misleading reports and ended up killing her, and he feels guilty about her death, so he leaves the party. Remy is a kind soul and he is distraught in the gardens, and he runs into Jardin Song, who is sitting up in a tree talking to him, and also Zidane Malik as well. Remy is very much attracted to Jardin Song, and it seems like the attraction is mutual, but then Zidane shows up and he is the court noble that appeared in the first chapter that spared Remy from the fight with Naji. It turns out both of them are the 3rd and 4th court noble vampires that are in discussion with a peace treaty with Queen Ophelia, and so he feels rightfully embarrassed and frustrated at being accosted by Zidane. If it wasn't clear, Jardin Song and Zidane Malik are married. Later on, after the ball, Remy does end up sleeping with Giselle for that information, and the following morning he is in his lodge, his private dwelling called Kinair Lodge, and he's sharing these reports with his friend Elke. In Illyria, Elke is known as Lady Whittaker, but secretly she's actually a vampire, and Remy saved her years ago when she was dying on the side of the road, and they have been fast friends ever since. Elke is also a weaponsmith, and she often fixes and reinforces his main weapon, Breaker. As they are reading over the report that Remy got from Giselle, they are recognizing that more instances of deaths with bluish blood have occurred, 3 specifically, and there is one at a close by location. So Remy decides to go on the road and Elke joins him to investigate what this blue blood is. Remy also raises concerns to Elke that the missing children in Illyria have tripled this year and no one's doing anything about it, and he keeps recognizing that reports are growing. On the road to this location to investigate the bluish blood, they encounter a rot vampire and it reanimates after they kill it. In trying to fight it, they are not entirely successful because they've never fought anything like this before, and Xiaodan Song appears because she has also been pursuing these reports and the cause of the rot and what is linked to it, and she ends up using this power that she has kept under wraps to vanquish this mutated vampire, and she uses the power of sunlight to do that and completely wipe it out. It is the only way to reliably kill them. Using this power taxes her body significantly though, and she ends up using it, saving both Elka and Remy, and then immediately passing out. So for safety, they take her back to Remy's lodge and put her into his bed. The next morning though, they are woken by knocks at the door to Kinea Lodge by Riones and a bunch of Reapers, keen to apprehend Remy for the murder of the Duke of Astonbury because he is the prime suspect. They are all scandalized when they see that Xiaodan Song is in Remy's dressing gown. The Reapers take Remy away under the pretense that they suspect he is the killer of the Duke of Astonbury, and Remy realizes that he's not given the proper respect of his station when they jail him instead of putting him on house arrest. And he realizes that he'd wasted years garnering respect that nobody was ever going to give him, which is just heartbreaking. But then Xiaodan Song and Zidan Malik come to essentially break him out of the cell because they both brokered a deal with Queen Ophelia for his release. And that deal is that Remy is the liaison between the court of Illyria and the 3rd and 4th court vampires, Zidan and Song, in trying to figure out what this rot is and where it's come from. It is revealed that in the archives underneath the city there are consistent experiments that were being conducted by Astonbury, and while they are being removed from the city because they don't want the experiments to go on anymore, one of them reanimates and chaos ensues. Remy, Song and Malik try and get this chaos under wraps, and while they are doing that they run into Vasilik, who seems to be part of this plot relating to the rot, and Vasilik and Zidan have a shared history, and Vasilik corners Remy in a threat to Zidan, but Remy cuts his way free. They suspect somehow that he is connected to the rot outbreak, but they're not quite sure how. He is a member of the 5th court. Before the three of them leave court to return to Xiaodan's home, Zidan is gifted a machine by Queen Ophelia, and this machine can help him determine a single person's blood type. This machine will be key in helping Zidan figure out what is going on with the rot and try to get to the source of what is going on in the blood groups of the rot victims. It's quite clear that Zidan has medical experience. He used to be a doctor and he is actually 800 years old. While they are on the road, they end up visiting Eugenie, who is a vampire and also an informant, and also her husband Paolo, who is human, and they gain some information from her about a recent attack on a village where a new vampire nest completely decimated the village. They detour on the road to stop a very similar attack to another nearby village, and in doing so they end up saving the mayor of that village and a lot of the local citizens. Even though the newly turned vampire leading that nest has Remy by the throat, he manages to cut himself away by some concealed knives and roll free, also determining in that exchange that this new vampire was working for Vasilik. On the road, to keep him sharp, Zidan and Remy practice sparring because obviously Zidan has so much experience, and in these fights Remy has to put his pride aside, which is not easy for him to do, and Zidan often pressures him and makes him feel embarrassed. This is also evident of Remy's growing attraction to Zidan that he does not want to acknowledge yet. On the road still, they stop by a hot spring and Xiaodan helps treat Remy's throat wound, but while she's doing this she reveals her attraction to him and that Zidan is attracted too. Remy doesn't take all of this information in and instead is focusing just on Song and saying things like he will never have to know, and Xiaodan replies with, "Is that what you really want?" So they're starting to question Remy's feelings and are beginning to undo the baggage, or let himself undo the baggage that he has carried for years with him at the court of Illyria. They are now almost at the gates of Changshui, which is Xiaodan Song's home, and Tingyi is the lodge, or the fortress I should say, that they reside in. It is set on a large island surrounded by a lake with a waterfall behind it, and Xiaodan's family live there along with the 3rd court. At the gates their friend Allegra greets them. She is a vampire with a very dark sense of humour and she keeps referring to Remy as the meat. Xiaodan also introduces Remy to her mother Queen Yingwei, who is suffering from a form of Alzheimer's or dementia, but in between her fits she does have her lucid moments, and in one of those lucid moments she knocks on Remy's door at night and takes him to show Xiaodan's heart, and Remy's like, "What is going on? This is an actual heart." And it turns out that Song has had a heart transplant which Zidan performed after a battle with the 5th court and the leader Etrian. Xiaodan is actually a Cambion, so she had a vampire parent and a human parent, and when Zidan and Lilith rose up to fight against Etrian in the 5th court, she was also part of that battle, and she almost died when she was stabbed by Etrian, but she was brought back with Lilith's heart, and Lilith had the sun power. So because of her Cambion status, she could maintain this heart. It does give her a heart murmur and makes her weaken more quickly, but she has this sunlight ability because of the transplant. Naji, the young vampire from the beginning of the book, is also at Tingyi, and he is the adopted brother of Zidane. Zidane turned him when he was dying and has mentored him ever since, and it's been about 5 years. While they're at Changshui, they receive reports that there is a coven or a nest of newly turned Fifth Court vampires on their lands, and they don't have enough numbers to both man Changshui and also investigate this nest. So Zidane and Song go off by themselves to look into it, and Remy is forced to stay behind because he is a human and they're worried about his vulnerability. Zidane has also, through his experimentation, figured out a way to neutralize or at least pause the rot from taking hold if he gets to someone newly infected quick enough. In creating the serum, Zidane has realized that there is a patient zero in terms of creation of the rot. The victim's blood type usually shows up in a sample with this additional AB blood type, and using this serum in time, it means that the patient won't end up dying from the rot. While Zidane and Song are off investigating this nest, Remy is wandering the fortress and he runs into Naji, and they end up confiding in each other. Naji was so angry at the beginning of the book because he was grieving his old lover Anastasia. Both of them had decided to try turning into vampires, but they disregarded the risk, and 50% of people who try and turn into vampires end up succumbing to the frenzy, and that means they go crazy with bloodlust and they need to be put down, and Anastasia essentially had to be put down, and Naji is the one who killed her. He also had an incredibly abusive father who beat him, and when he was at his lowest low and dying again on the side of the road, that's when Zidane came in to help him. But all of the vampires at Tingyi are hundreds of years old, and Remy, being the human that is closest in age to Naji, he recognizes that you need to go through a grieving process and vent to someone like-minded, and they kind of bond in a way over the people that they've lost because it's something that they can relate to each other over. Eventually, Naji realizes that Remy does like Zidane as well and asks why hasn't he done anything about it, and Remy says that he keeps expecting them to demand something in return from him because that's what all of his previous relationships have been like. They've been transactional and they haven't been healthy. They've been abusive. A vampire envoy arriving at the gates interrupts this conversation, and this vampire envoy messenger is carrying a cloak that belonged to Jardin, and it's covered in blood. And so Remy goes to Zidane's lab, grabs some vials, takes his weapon breaker, and then goes with this envoy to find out what is going on with Zidane and Song. Vasilic and 70 vampires strong greet Remy at the nest, and there is no sign of Song and Zidane, so at least he thinks they are safely hidden. Vasilic tries to get Remy to bargain with him, but Remy won't budge from being loyal to Zidane and Song. Even if he is really desperate for more information on the Night Empress, he doesn't budge. Vasilic says to Remy, "Do you know how the Night King died? He could compel others to do his bidding, and Lilith and Zidane are the only ones who stood up to him, and Malik is the only one who survived." Remy manages to parry Vasilic's blows and flees into the tunnels, but his PTSD is triggered by the cave environment, and he ends up finding a place to hole up and have a breakdown. Through the walls of the cave, Remy hears Zidane and Song, and Zidane gives him directions in the cave tunnels on how to get to them both, and in following these directions he encounters a caved-in tunnel and goes the other way instead, and then is accosted by all of the children that have been missing across Illyria. They have been turned into vampires, and Vasilic sets them on him. Shortly after, Zidane and Song manage to find Remy again, and he hears their voices saying, "I don't know how many times he's been bitten, and can we replenish what he's lost?" They think Remy is going to die from being infected by the rot, but he manages to communicate to them he's lucid enough to say that the serum is in his pocket, he brought it with him, and Zidane administers it to him, and then he's lucid enough to say, "Go ahead, make me your familiar, do what you can do to save my life." And so begins the relationship between all three of them, and as they are leaving the caves, even though Remy is still a little bit weak, he is renewed by the strength of the healing properties of their blood. He is confronted by Vasilic but cuts him on the face in the same place, saying, "You might have shared history with Malik, but you don't have it with me. He might spare you, but I won't." Thanks to the serum, the rot remains dormant in Remy's blood, which is creating antibodies, and he wakes up later on covered in bandages back at Tingyi, the fortress. Because he's scared, he deliberately avoids going to the private quarters of Song and Malik and ends up wandering the gardens instead. He again runs into Naji, who says, "I've never seen them more terrified than when they brought you back." And finally, Remy settles on the decision to go to their rooms. The book says that as Remy makes that decision, he looks over the fortress and a rainbow forms over its many arches. So he just decided to be in a poly relationship and then he gets a rainbow. How beautiful. Zidane and Song finally take Remy into their bed. Remy also ends up sharing his past with them, and at 13 years old he was sent with a bunch of Reapers to a trap that was made by the Fifth Court, and it ended up being just these new Reapers as the front line against all these newly turned vampires. And to survive, he holed up in a cave entrance and used Breaker for hours and hours on end, so he almost put himself into a trance of survival, and his father had to break him out of that. And so when Edgar tackled Remy to stop him from this trance and say, look, you're safe now, Remy attacked Edgar and injured his leg very badly. And that is why Remy's father is in a wheelchair now. Remy says, this is what I owe him now, I fight because he can't, and that rhetoric is reinforced as a guilt mechanism consistently by Edgar Pendergast. Zidane also opens up a little bit to Remy about the Night Empress and the Fifth Court by saying that after killing Etrian and leaving the court, he often received threats, and that was leaving victims for him to find, but he hasn't had one of those in over 20 years. All of them find a balance and they've been a throuple for a few weeks, and then Zidane realizes that patient zero is actually Remy's blood. Zidane is absolutely furious at Remy, and before Remy can actually communicate what is happening, because he had no idea that this was the case, Elke arrives at the fortress doors and says that there has been an attempt on his father's life. She also warns that there are a few hundred silently standing, newly turned rot vampires on the lands of Cheng Shui, waiting at the back of the castle to scale the waterfall and invade from behind. Even though Remy's father is very conniving, he has guilt-tripped Remy so hard that Remy believes the rhetoric that his father is related by blood and he is the only kind of clan Remy will ever know, so he's got a particular kind of loyalty to him. He says that we're tied by blood, but also in another way, kind of like the vampire court customs. Zidane and Vasilik are kind of tied in this way as well, because they are both linked to the Fifth Court in the past, and if either of them move against each other to kill each other, there is like a mental recoil built into that. It can be overcome because Zidane did that to kill Etrian, but it's something that also causes a lot of inner turmoil and grief for anyone who pushes past that mental barrier. After the verbal fight with Zidane and Remy as Elke arrives, Zidane says that I think it would be best if Remy returned to his father. Partway back to Illyria with Elke, Elke remarks that she never thinks she's seen Remy happier than when he's with those two, and Remy's like, I don't know why I left in the first place, and he turned their cart around and went straight back to help. He and Elke both jump into the fight against the newly turned rot vampires that are trying to overwhelm Cheng Shui, and while they're amidst the fight, Remy says, get away from me, you bastards, and for some reason they listen to him and they stop fighting. Now that he is infused with the serum and the antibodies, he kind of has a connection to the rot, so he can now influence the rot vampires. Vasilik isn't done though, because a giant colossus comes out of the water of the waterfall to join the fight, and in being distracted by this fight with the colossus, Remy is flung from the tower of the waterfall. He uses, thankfully, the knife and chain that Elke gifted him to latch on and swing to safety, and Vasilik ends up fighting Zidane, who took most of the blow that was meant for Remy. They also manage to trap and kill the colossus. Xiaodan zaps it with her sunlight, which very much taxes her energy, and Remy is holding her in his arms when Vasilik and Zidane are sparring together. Vasilik spots their weakness and he launches to attack both of them, and Remy turns his back to protect Xiaodan when Zidane lurches forward and kills Vasilik. Then Vasilik's dying words in Remy's ear are, Zidane killed your mother. After Zidane killed Vasilik, he is in massive grief and shock because of that mental bond and repercussion, so Remy doesn't bring up Vasilik's last words with him yet. Then during the cleanup of Cheng Shui from all of the rot vampires attacking, they're cleaning the bodies out of the water, and Remy notices a figure dressed in a scarlet robe off in the forest. He tries to pursue, but it disappears. After several days of Xiaodan resting in bed and Zidane sequestered away in his lab, Remy goes and confronts Zidane and says, hey Malik, you aren't eating anything, you're not taking care of yourself, and he offers himself to Malik. Zidane apologizes and concedes that Remy is a victim, and he says that he doesn't trust easily. Remy ends up being radiant with joy after realizing that he will always have a choice when it comes to choosing Zidane and Song. They all return to Illyria and they are accosted upon entry by Riones and the Reapers, who take Remy into custody for being suspected of Astonbury's murder and also as a key controller of the rot. So they don't cause a fuss, Remy lets himself be taken to a cell by Riones and also tells him about all the excessive blood that they were taking from him as a Reaper. When he's let out of the cell, he goes directly to his father and confronts him about the mutations and says, why is my blood involved in the experiments? In response, Edgar, who is pushed in his wheelchair by Grimesworthy, goes and shows Remy his secret lab where Dr. Yost is working on experiments to enhance his body and his vitality. Edgar reveals that he was working with Vasilic to create and test the rot, and he dismisses Remy's concerns about his safety by going, "You were never in any real danger. Those infected with the rot would never hurt you." Edgar was moving rot-infested corpses outside of the city when Astonbury stole one, and then it reanimated inside the city, and that caused all of the chaos at the beginning of the book. Edgar reveals that he is the one who was responsible for Astonbury's murder after all, so he's just let Remy take the fall this whole time. And to enact the murder, he used Grimesworthy and also a vampire informant / envoy that is the same envoy and spy that we saw when Remy was brought to meet Vasilic. Edgar and Dr. Yost are using the rot as experimentation, and Edgar doesn't care about the lives of innocents. He threatens Remy, saying, "If you share the knowledge that I'm involved," he threatens to release the rot on the city of Illyria, and he threatens this so that Remy doesn't tell Jourdan or Zidane of his plans so far. He also lays on the guilt very thick. He says, "You forget that you owe me, boy. You're the one who put me in this chair." Edgar also reveals that Grimesworthy is an experiment, but he is a rot experiment that passes so closely for human that no one has picked it up yet. He also says that it is time for the Pendergasts to rise and claim what they have lost so far, which is referring to his acclaim and political reputation at court. He then shakily stands up from his wheelchair and says, "See what the gift of your blood has done for me, Remington." After this, we cut to Remy being blackout drunk in Kinneia Lodge to cope with the fact that his father was behind everything the whole time, and he is unable to disclose anything to Zidane and Song until they have safely left Illyria because he's afraid of his father's informants. Jourdan nurses Remy back to being kind of sober again, and also confides and tells Remy that she loves him. She loves Zidane as well, but she loves him too. In this moment of trust and vulnerability, Remy tells her about Vasilic's last words, and she is shocked to hear this is the case. She says if Zidane kept anything from you, it was because of guilt. They then sleep together, and Remy falls asleep afterwards, and when he wakes up, there is just a lovely note left from her, and as he finishes reading it, his door is knocked down by an angry mob. This mob is convinced that killing him will end up killing and stopping the rot, so they grab him in order to string him up. As they are taking him to hang him, they pass by Giselle, who is already hung up, and also Elke, who is hung up, and Remy has a breakdown and starts fighting back, but he's unable to free himself from the mob. As the mob is stringing Remy up to hang, Elke actually surges forward to save him and cut the rope, and she's not dead after all. She's like, it takes a lot more than that to kill a vampire. Remy, after passing out, wakes up in a room surrounded by Song, Malik, and Elke. They manage to get him safely away from the mob, but in doing so, Song and Zidane threaten to fight anyone who was going to harm Remy, therefore annulling the peace treaty discussion that has been happening so far. The reason those two were also absent was because they were transporting Queen Ophelia outside of Illyria to safety. Zidane also confesses to Remy that he didn't kill Remy's mother, but he fears that he might have caused her death incidentally because of how he killed Etrian and left the Fifth Court. He fears that her body was one of the victims left as a threat to him by the court. She also had the court symbol carved on her shoulder. Remy doesn't get long to recover because the city of Aleuve is attacked. A storm brews overhead, and the newly turned vampires are waiting silently outside the gates of Illyria, and both Jourdan and Zidane are concerned because they've only ever seen this magic from an ancient vampire. This is not a normal storm, and the way the vampires are standing, Zidane says he has only seen this kind of enthrallment before from the Fifth Court. Before Zidane and Lilith rose up in the past to fight Etrian, Zidane was compelled to do a lot of awful things, and he had no control over his body doing so. Illyria and the new rot vampires are now at war, and all of them have pitched in to help the humans. While Rionis is helping Remy in the midst of the fight, Remy reveals that somehow he can push back on the vampires that are trying to invade the city, and that edge helps everyone survive. He can feel them in his mind, and when he turns in battle, he sees the same scarlet figure that he initially saw in the forest. This figure catches Zidane and forces him to kneel, and she compels him and forces him to fight Remy. And Remy realizes that all the sparring they have done throughout the course of the book is the reason that he is still alive, and he manages just to swing Breaker at this scarlet figure and lodges it in her body, and that is enough of a distraction for Zidane to break free. Remy sees under the hood of the scarlet figure, and it is his mother looking out at him, and she says, "Why are you siding in a battle with my murderers against me?" She now slips into Remy's mind and compels him instead, forcing him to fight his friends and loved ones, and he slashes through something fleshy before a beloved voice tries to call him back. This beloved voice tells him to stop, and he comes back to himself with a dagger planted a breath between Xiaodan's eyes. She managed to bring him back, but then he turns and sees Naji's lifeless body being held by Zidane. Naji leapt in front of Zidane to protect him while Remy was being compelled, and Naji lost his life because of that defense. Edgar, who has been watching, now appears in battle and shouts to Lagaya, Remy's mother, and says he knew that the scent of Remy's blood would attract her and bring her out of hiding. Edgar appears healthy and standing, and he shoots an arrow at Lagaya, but it doesn't have any effect. She says, "I am the Night Empress and I will destroy you." Before she can do anything, Xiaodan jumps in with her sun power and unleashes it on Lagaya. But Remy swears he sees her disappear just before the light hits. Zidane is cold and grieving, and he says to Remy that he didn't know what he was doing and it wasn't him, but he's still really hurt by Naji's death. Edgar says that Lagaya ran away from him to join her lover in the first court and become a familiar while she was pregnant with Remy. Edgar also offers a political alliance to Zidane and Song and says Remy can be their ward until unrest settles in Illyria. After the battle, everyone kind of splits for a few days, and Remy gets a note and a gift from Elke saying that she has left the city as well. He decides to go and dig up his mother's grave to see if her body is actually there, but there's no body in the grave, so it is Lagaya, it is his mother. In a private audience, Queen Ophelia thanks Remy for defending the city. It turned out the infected vampires that rose in the city were actually planted by the First Court as part of the attack. Ophelia has also elected Edgar Pendergast as Lord High Steward of the Archives, a position that he has wanted for a long time since Astonbury usurped it from him. Dr. Yost has also received similar acclaim, but Ophelia is suspicious about his experiments given that they are not ethical in any means, and he is therefore on probation, and both him and Edgar are being monitored. Queen Ophelia also warns Remy that because he is a familiar of Zidane and Song, Illyria is no longer safe for him. Malik doesn't think that Xiaodan killed the Night Empress, and so they are both leaving Illyria while the rot is in progress of being neutralized in order to pursue her. Like Zidane is mourning the loss of Naji, Xiaodan is also mourning the loss of her sun power because it seemed to burn out of her after her battle with the Night Empress. Remy does not disclose to the Queen that the Night Empress is his mother. Similarly, Edgar does not disclose his role in Astonbury's death to the Queen, and also convinces her that it was Astonbury that was responsible for the rot outbreak and not Edgar himself. Edgar quietly suggests to Remy that an army of controlled infected vampires is the only defense that Illyria might have if the First Court decide to attack Illyria again. He's clearly still experimenting and forcing Remy into silence. Remy is cutting ties with Illyria, and he puts Kinnear Lodge up for sale. He also decides that he's going to leave the city with Song and Malik. Over the course of the book, Remy has realized what he deserves and what his self-worth is, and he's looking forward to being with Song and Malik. The closing lines in this book are, "Whatever might come, he'd be by their side, and that was better than being without them." And so concludes my wrap-up of Silver Under Nightfall. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know down below if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.